They didn't knock on my door because I'd committed a crime. They knocked because the HOA told them to. Red and blue lights washed over my gate by the lake, and in less than 5 minutes, I watched 2 police officers realize they'd been sent into something much bigger than they were told. That was the moment everything changed. I was tightening the last strand of wire along my fence when I heard tires on gravel. Not the sound of a neighbor's truck, not someone cutting through the drive by mistake. This was slow, deliberate, careful. I straightened up, one hand still resting on the fence post, and looked toward the long driveway that cut between the cottonwoods and down toward the gate near the dam. Red and blue lights flashed once, then went still. That alone told me this wasn't routine. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked toward the house. Not rushing, not stalling, just steady. The lake behind me was flat and quiet. The dock line stretched tight, the fence running exactly where it had always run, long before anyone slapped the words Homeowners Association on a sign and pretended that gave them power over land they'd never owned. By the time I reached the porch, the knock had already come once. Hard, deliberate, the kind you don't ignore. I opened the door. 2 officers stood there side by side, tan uniforms, crisp patrol car, angled across my drive like it belonged there. One was younger eyes moving constantly, scanning past me toward the yard, the fence, the water. The other had more years on his face, one hand resting close to his belt posture, neutral but alert. "Afternoon, sir," the older one said. "We need to speak with you." About what I asked. The younger officer cleared his throat. "We received a call from the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. They're reporting a dangerous trespasser refusing to comply with lawful orders." I let the words hang in the air for a second. Dangerous trespasser, on my own land. Dangerous, I repeated calmly, on my property. The older officer didn't react. His voice stayed even. "Sir, we're just responding to the call. The HOA claims you blocked access to a community shoreline and threatened residents." I looked past them back toward the gate, the fence line, the stretch of water curving into the dam I'd helped engineer decades earlier. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. "I haven't threatened anyone," I said. "And that shoreline isn't community property." "That's not what the complaint says," the younger officer replied, shifting his weight. "Complaints aren't deeds," I said. "Who signed it?" The older officer raised an eyebrow just slightly. "HOA President, Bethany Crowell." There it was, the name. The reason. I stepped out onto the porch so we weren't boxed into the doorway. Not defensive, just open. Did she provide a boundary reference? A survey number? County filing? The younger officer glanced at his partner. The older one reached into a folder tucked under his arm and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A color printout. Blue and red lines scribbled across the water. The word community stamped boldly across the lake like confidence alone could make it true. "No county seal," I said, not touching it. "No plat number. No recorder's stamp." "Sir," the younger officer said, his tone tightening, "are you refusing to comply with HOA directives?" I met his eyes. "I'm asking why an HOA thinks it can summon police to my front gate over a civil boundary dispute." The air shifted. Not hostile yet, but no longer easy. The older officer glanced back toward the patrol car, then toward the fence line stretching down to the dam. "The call mentioned you were armed," he said. I almost laughed. "Almost. This is Montana," I said evenly. "Everyone's armed. That doesn't make it a crime." Silence settled for a beat. Long enough for the lake to lap once against the rocks. Long enough for the younger officer to realize this wasn't the situation he'd expected. "Sir," the older officer said, "would you mind stepping down so we can take a look at the area in question?" "I don't mind you looking," I replied. "I do mind being accused of trespass on land I own." I walked down the porch steps slowly, hands visible, no sudden movements. They followed boots crunching in the gravel. The fence line was right there, straight, solid, unbroken. A sign hung on the gate recorded property line, no unauthorized access. The younger officer read it out loud. The older one frowned. "The HOA claims this gate blocks community lake access," he said. "Then the HOA is lying," I answered. "That access was never theirs." I could feel it then, the shift under the conversation. They hadn't expected calm. They'd expected yelling, threats, something they could resolve quickly and move on from. Instead, they had questions. Another vehicle came down the drive, fast, gravel spraying. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Bethany Crowell arrived like she'd been waiting for her cue. Her SUV door slammed before the engine fully died. She marched toward us in a red jacket, clipboard already in hand, smile-tight eyes sharp. She didn't look at me first. She went straight to the officers. "Thank God you're here," she said. "He's been non-compliant for weeks." The older officer straightened. "Ma'am, we're still assessing. This is HOA land." Bethany cut in, tapping the clipboard. "He erected an illegal fence and is blocking residents from the lake. We've issued notices. He ignored them. We need him removed." She finally turned toward me, chin lifted like she was looking at something stubborn and inconvenient. I said nothing. Let her talk. Because the louder she got, the clearer one thing became. She was very confident for someone who didn't own a single inch of the ground she was standing on. She angled the clipboard toward the officers. "We've documented this multiple times. He was warned. He ignored us. Now he's blocking community access and acting hostile." The younger officer glanced at the map again. "Ma'am, who prepared this?" "Our compliance committee," Bethany replied without hesitation. "Based on HOA bylaws and updated shoreline use." The phrase "updated shoreline use" rattled in my head like a loose bolt. The older officer turned to me. "Sir, do you have documentation showing your boundary lines?" "I do," I said. "But before that, I'd like to see the full complaint packet." Bethany's eyes flicked just slightly. "There isn't time for games," she snapped. "The HOA has authority here." "Ma'am," the officer said, firmer now. "HOA authority doesn't override recorded land ownership." She bristled. "He's obstructing access." "Access granted by whom?" the younger officer asked. Bethany hesitated. I could see it, just for a second. I spoke. "No one here has ever heard me threaten anyone. What I've said clearly is that the HOA doesn't own this shoreline." "You don't get to redefine community history," she snapped. "I don't," I said calmly. "The deed does." That word changed everything. The temperature dropped. The older officer's posture shifted, focused now. "Do you have that documentation on hand?" he asked. "I do. Inside." Bethany stepped forward. "No, you're not going anywhere until this is resolved." The older officer stepped between us. "Sir can retrieve his paperwork." Bethany stared at him, stunned. "Are you serious?" "I am," he said, "because right now all we have is an HOA map with no legal backing." I walked back inside. My heart was steady, but my mind wasn't. For the first time, a quiet doubt crept in. What if I was wrong? What if I'd missed something? What if this had changed while I wasn't paying attention? The folder sat where it always did. Deed on top. Survey beneath. Water use agreement tucked inside. I stared at it for a moment longer than I needed to. This land had been measured, filed, inspected. It was solid. And yet here I was being treated like an intruder. When I stepped back outside, Bethany was talking fast, voice clipped. "The board approved enforcement measures. He's been warned." "You can't send police based on internal HOA warnings," the younger officer said. I handed the folder to the older officer. He opened it carefully. His eyes moved line by line. Dates, stamps, signatures. The younger officer leaned in. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Bethany watched their faces change, and for the first time since she arrived, uncertainty crept in. "What does that say?" she demanded. The older officer closed the folder halfway. "It says this land and shoreline are privately owned." "That can't be right," she said. "It is." The younger officer exhaled slowly. "Ma'am, did the HOA verify ownership before filing this complaint?" Bethany answered too fast. "Of course we did." Her eyes told a different story. She leaned in harder. "That deed is outdated. The HOA updated the shoreline boundaries years ago." "Ma'am," the older officer said, "land boundaries aren't updated by everyone. They're recorded by the county." "This isn't about paperwork," Bethany snapped. "This is about compliance." "By whom?" the younger officer asked. "The board. Me." The confidence was cracking now, turning sharp, defensive. "Did you tell dispatch he was dangerous?" the older officer asked. "Yes," she said. "Because he is." "Dangerous how?" She hesitated. "He's armed. He's hostile." I asked questions. I said, "That's not hostility." The older officer raised his hand. "Ma'am, calm down." She laughed, sharp and brittle. "Calm down. He's blocking a lake families use, and you're siding with him because he waved a piece of paper." "We're siding with the law," the officer replied. That landed harder than anything I could have said. Bethany looked past him toward the road. Neighbors had started to gather. Phones were coming out. quietly, watching. "This isn't over," she said to me. "No," I replied. "It is." I walked to the gate and knelt beside the fence post. Beneath the gravel half buried was the reason this conversation existed at all. I brushed the dirt away and pried it loose. A steel survey marker, thick, cold, stamped Deep County Survey, Dam Project 1989. The older officer leaned closer. "That's permanent." "Yes," I said, "and it matches the survey." Bethany scoffed. "Anyone can plant metal in the ground." "Not with recorded coordinates," the officer replied after comparing the numbers. "They match perfectly." Her face drained. Anger gave way to disbelief. Disbelief to fear. The radio crackled. County confirmed it. The deed was clear. The survey valid. The older officer closed his notebook. "Ma'am, the HOA has no authority here. Any further action will need to go through civil court." Bethany's jaw tightened. She turned and walked back to her SUV, heels biting into gravel. The engine roared to life and she was gone. The patrol car left without lights this time. The drive returned to dust and quiet. I stood there alone again, the marker cold in my palm. Not victory. Not yet. Just certainty. Later that night I learned the truth. The access agreements. The developer. The pressure campaign. Bethany wasn't the architect. She was the front. By morning, lawyers were involved. By the end of the week, injunctions were filed. By the time it reached court, the HOA's paper trail told a story they couldn't explain away. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She read the filings, the maps, the payments, the misuse of authority. The ruling was clean. The HOA had no claim. The access agreements were void. Bethany was held personally liable for abuse of process. The developer's name was referred for investigation. Bethany didn't look at me when it ended. She didn't have to. The clipboard was useless now. The fence stayed where it was. The lake stayed quiet. And the HOA that tried to own what wasn't theirs collapsed under the weight of its own lies. The lesson was simple: authority only works when no one checks it.